Hi, my name is Dave Bradley, and this is From the Mind of the Mystic on the Schizophrenic channel. Today we're discussing a rather morbid topic that is a viewer request, and I don't know exactly where I'm going to go with this, but the basic topic is I was asked, I'll try and include it on the screen somewhere, I was asked to do a video discussing what happens after we die, so let's dive right into that. See you in the video. So before we go into it, I just want to start by saying, I've had an unbelievable response on the channel. We're over 10,500 views on the first video, which is, there's only one person in the universe. I think we're getting up to nearly 400 comments on that. It's been a really overwhelming response, and I mean that in both a positive and a negative way. I wasn't expecting this result, this kind of level of interaction. I am far from complaining about it. But yeah, it's been intense. It's been an intense 11 days since I posted that video, and it's fascinating to see all the things that you posted. There will be a reply video coming where I address, in a Q&A style, some of those questions I stated before. But to the topic of what happens after we die, I'm going to start right from the top of this video with saying, honestly, I do not know with any concrete certainty what happens. I have plenty of reason to believe that there's things to unpack when asking that question, and things to digest, and ways to think about it that are more useful or less useful. But I honestly believe that anyone telling you they know what happens after we die, they can have an idea of it, they can have a concept of it, they can have a theory, they can have a hypothesis, they can say what happened when they nearly died, which we will be discussing, near-death experiences in later sections in the video. But the only anecdotal data we have of anyone ever dying and coming back from the dead was Jesus Christ, and that's one of the most contentious ideas in human history that has been widely refuted outside the Catholic Church and Christianity in general. So that said, I'm going to pause and then launch into the full description of things that lead me to conclude or suggest what I think might happen. But yeah, I just wanted to emphasize, and I said this very specifically in the notes for this episode, I have no idea. I've only done it once, and I have died. I've only done it once, and I don't remember it. Saying otherwise would be deceitful and manipulative. That said, this is my understanding of what reality suggests might be the case. So let's move on to that section of the video. So, yeah, to dive in with the topic. It was a viewer request. Someone asked me to cover what happens when we die, specifically as a question for me to address based on this concept of thinking. That's been presented in the previous videos. As I said in the prior section, I've only done it once, and it was accidentally due to an overdose, which is actually chronicled on my previous Schizophrenic channel and in the early stages of this channel as well. I died after a semi-accidental overdose of a chemical which I will never use again. Was resuscitated and then put in an 11-hour artificial coma, which I woke up from filled with an unfathomably powerful urge and inclination, and just like, you go back and look at the other videos on the old channel, it was like a renewed fervor for life that seemed to accompany quite a philosophical head state, quite a spiritually inclined way of thinking that's not entirely evident to me was purely the fear of death or the appreciation of the second chance. That was a factor, but it did seem as though I was inhabited by a renewed life force, and I remember when I came back from the coma, simultaneously dropping in and from above and below, maybe even just above, I don't really I always say above and below because it felt like I sort of snapped back into my consciousness, as though I'd like slapped back into myself from an infinite white light. You could argue I was in hospital. Maybe the infinite white light was around me. It's hard to say what was going on. I'd just gone through a very complex experience and come out of an anesthesia. But what I can say from that was that whether spiritual or merely the fact that I'd had a good night's sleep under anesthesia, I came back with a deep-seated and intense conviction that I'd been given a second chance at life and that I wasn't to waste it, and that while I don't remember anything between life and death, the aftermath of having died was that I had a renewed spirituality, a deep sense of purpose, and that lasted for many years and is sort of where this channel came from. So that's one near-death experience. I also had a near-death experience after an actual suicide attempt, which is what led me to have the initial stage of psychosis, and that took me to what appeared to be a very different timeline. It appeared to be like a very hellish version of the reality I'd been in before, that was much darker, more malevolent, and more infused with evil than the reality I'm in now, or the one I'd been in prior. Obviously, as a person that's had psychosis and schizophrenia diagnosis, that's massively up for debate, but I've definitely experienced that I've transitioned across different extreme states of consciousness affiliated with experiences of having come close to death. So I'll be back in one moment. Where was I? Extreme states of consciousness correlating with brushes with death, basically, that in some circumstances multiple times led me to believe I'd gone into an altered or alternate version of reality, tinged with malevolence or benevolence and there are two examples of that. This has not happened to me. This happened to me multiple times. I've actually spoken to quite a lot of people who I'm not going to name drop or mention because that's their private information, but I've had a surprising number of people tell me that after failed suicide attempts, they found themselves to believe to either be in hell or in limbo, like in purgatory. And this is from pretty unreligious people, or like especially people that prior to this were unreligious. And I think if you look, just type into YouTube near-death experiences, like it's not an uncommon phenomena. What you would take away from that, I don't know. But it's definitely something that seems to have a profound effect on people. The survival of a suicide or a near death, whether suicide or not, seems to... It felt to me as though I'd brought something back from the realms I'd visited that then changed the nature of the reality I was in. If I was to be completely honest about what I thought, there have been times where I've struggled to believe that I survived those experiences, and I think that's quite a common thread I've heard as well. And I would say grace brought me out of those dark places, and whatever you want to make of that expression I've just used, you're welcome to. But these were some of the most profound experiences in my life. I'm not a hellfire preacher. I don't claim to be. I've been trying to not give misophonic noises on the mic, but I do get dry mouth when I'm talking. These experiences can be profoundly life-changing for the better or worse, and a video that I'm moving towards doing, I'm more and more inclined to do the more I want to talk about it, is reality shifting, that concept. So if you want to know any more about reality shifting, this is sort of what we're discussing anyway. but with an air of skepticism, put that in the comments and I can kind of cover that, because that is on the list and I'd like to know if there's any interest in it. And this leads us on to the kind of spiritual or the mystical side of the relationship with these experiences. I'm reticent to go too far into it unless I'm really clear on what I'm trying to say. But before we move on to what I think might be an explanation, or what my ideas based on what I've experienced are about what happens after we die, I'm going to just tell a little anecdotal story because, I'm reticent to publicise it. But on a couple of occasions, I've lost friends, and most recently that's happened. And being schizophrenic, losing someone very, very close to you, and I think a lot of people talk to people that they've lost, but as a sort of mystic, say, putting it kindly, and as a schizophrenic for sure, having that friend visit me as a audible, sensible, dialogical conversation that seemed deeply real to me, to my mind, for several weeks, which culminated in me being deeply sleep deprived, and because he was there so consistently, till I guided him to a vortex portal that had appeared while I was hallucinating in like a visionary state, and that when he went there, this voice went to go and investigate it. I said, why not go through there and see what that is? And he was like, he came back like the next morning. I woke up and he's like, that wasn't it, was the first thing that went through my head. And I was like, whoa, okay, all right. And then I said, maybe try a few others. And evidently, even if this was only in my own mind, the subjective being I was experiencing as my friend's echo, or maybe even really him, I would be reticent to say otherwise, but it felt extremely real, faded over the coming days, and he didn't actually come back after that. So what you make of that anecdotal evidence, or data, or story, or just that anecdote, is up to you. But I'm also, in regards birth, there's probably a relevant story as well, because, like, loosely speaking, my entire philosophy anyway, as outlined in the previous videos, is that we come down from the dream world into the waking world, and then this world is kind of an objective reality, but that we're experiencing it subjectively, and that's the only thing we can say with certain. This infers that the objective reality might not be as objective as we think, it might be more like a dream. But one interesting anecdote that adds a bit of validity to this perspective as well, it's not about death actually in this case, it's about birth. So while I have a son, I won't say no more about, well, before he was born, around the second or third trimester, I started being visited by a white orb, and like me being schizophrenic, I just dismissed this and was like, go away. But it kept getting bigger and bigger each night, and more. And then one night, it finally flew up in my face and was shaking around. I swear to God, this is absolutely what I experienced for a fact. Whether it's real or not is up to you to decide. But this orb flying in my face, and I was like, "What do you want?" Shouted at it, and it just zoomed into my partner's stomach, and I was like, "Oh my God, it's my son." And then I said, "Are you okay? I love you." And then I felt this massive flood of release of just unbelievable, like, oxytocin style energy into me. And the other probably bit I should have told you sooner, I've told this story many times, but prior to this, we'd been becoming tighter and tighter, more and more in disturbed sleep, and I've been singing through the wall of my partner's stomach, singing to him to get him to sleep. To try and get him to sleep. And then after this, I kept doing it because it's such a profound experience, and then sang to him when they did the skin bond when he was born, and that was probably the most beautiful moment of my life because he was screaming and crying, and I sang the melody to the song I'd been singing, and he instantly calmed and relaxed into my chest. that in itself was the most beautiful experience of my entire life. But to say with certainty that I definitely experienced that, I interacted with my son before he was born, whether real or not. But I find that those hallucinations of that extremely compelling, and I could back that up with further data. But what I'm saying, the reason I'm mentioning it is that it seems like even in the objective world, there's evidence for spirits coming before they're born. So you could almost argue that, like, the logical extrapolation of that data, were it real, which I've experienced it to be, were that I was in communion or conversation or dialogue, able to interact with my son before he was born, which is heartbreakingly beautiful, and that I've been able to communicate, potentially, if the validity of the pre-birth story is not in question, that leaves open to the idea that the post-death story may also be true as well. So I just wanted to cover that, and then I'm going to move it into a bit more gently, because that was extremely emotionally taxing for me not to cry and actually well up and get choked and deliver that information. Now we're going to move on to how my understanding of reality might allow for these things. So let's go into that. So I've said in other videos that I believe that we may have a kind of non-dual, non-local consciousness. That makes sense. This data I'm adding here implies or infers that in the objective world there may be such a thing as disembodied or embodied but transmedium consciousness, or like a kind of maybe as such that not only is pure consciousness infinite, but that's the substrate in which everything else exists, but that when asked the question what happens after we die, I would say it depends how you die, really. But many other videos will have covered, no doubt, wild, unfounded theories, and also probably some quite reasonable data points from anecdotal data. But two perspectives on it. One, if we are part of one infinite consciousness that was never born, never dies, as was revealed to me in the sort of LSD state, and that's a more interior, a more pure, a more selfless, in the spiritual sense, lacking self or lacking identity part of ourselves is potentially immortal. Like the Delphian Oracle was, they would go to the Delphic Oracle to have visions on, like, they think like Ergot or something. It was sort of like Soma, something like that. But the idea was that once you'd awoken to your own eternal nature, a bit like in Christianity, the Christians later adopted this, like through the kingdom of heaven is, but the only way to the kingdom of heaven is through me. And it's almost it's like the Delphic Oracle. So there was a similar thing. So once you'd recognize your own immortality or eternality rather than immortality, you would never die and you would go on to eternal life. Something like that. This is what I believe, based on what I've experienced, that maybe once you awaken, or once saved, always saved, but not saved in the Christian sense, but like once you have awakened to the true nature of reality, you may be able to transcend life and death. And that's a profound statement to make that even I don't have the hubris to say with certainty, but this is what I think, but like I'm reticent to be in any way prescriptive about it. But what I've written here is our transcendent self, with that which has become awakened in ever-increasing spirals up towards decreasing spirality into unity state consciousness, it could well, like a transcendent part of ourselves, the car, as discussed in the previous video, or like the id of Freudian, or the true self, might well survive death by virtue of the fact it was never born, and that if this life is just a dream state that we sort of come into, you know, the timeline seems to be fairly consistent in this reality. You can warp it, you can twist it, you can become awakened, you can have phenomenologically astonishing experiences, but it's still a life. There's still something objectively happening to the dreamer in this dream. There is an objective experience being had, whether real or not, of a world that is evident, whether real or not, you know, and that the animating force of that was never born and may never die, and that's honestly what I believe. And I've given some little data points as to why I believe that, and I think that's all I can manage today, because that's a lot to take in. So I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you for watching. The next video, so other video options we've got for the future is what dreams make up, identity and dreaming, consciousness, and what may we have forgotten about life through the virtue of dream amnesia. Reality shifting, which is something I'm like pretty suspicious of, but also like I've massively had personal experience of that. We've got like a hope core video planned, maybe. True healing is realizing, to quote Duncan Trussell quote, I love the way he speaks, I love Duncan Trussell. True healing is realizing you were never fucking sick in the first place. I've got one called Who Rules the World? The Devil's in the Details. Non-physical entities influencing the world through dreams, inspiration and synchronicity, and that not all inspiration is divine. There's no techniques for ego death is one. Law of attraction and other lies, and beware of unearned wisdom. So there's some little markers for like things that future videos might be about. I've got 11, 12, 13 video ideas, 14 if we include a podcast I've got lined up. So I'm going to just leave it there, but take your time to unpack that. I'd love your comments, thoughts, feedback and feeling on that, whether you agree or disagree, and if so, why you agree or why you don't. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, share the video with anyone that you might think would find it useful. So thank you very much. I've been David Bradley, aka Schizophrenic on the Mind of a Mystic podcast. Catch you in the next one. Bye.